The A.Q. Miller School and Media and Communication. She started there in the fall of 2018 as an instructor and has since taught data journalism, newspaper design, photo editing, and content management systems. Professor Nguyen participated in the news industry in 2006 after graduating from the University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Saigon, Vietnam. She earned her doctoral degree in journalism and mass communication in 2020. Her research interests are media economics and media policies, while her professional experience includes various journalistic skills, especially data visualization. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Nguyen, and she can begin.
Hello, everyone. Currently it's like in the midnight in Vietnam, but I'm very happy and delightful to meet everyone here. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Hi. Yeah, great. So if you cannot hear me, make sure you let me know.
Pardon me?
Okay. Okay, can I start now?
Yeah, the blue buttons. Okay, Nguyen. Ask her to say something.
Okay, I'll say something.
Yeah,
Do not hear her.
say something.
Okay.
That's all set.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me
Yes.
now? Okay, great. So I can start right now, right?
Yes, I can hear her. So the audio is there. Now,
Hold on. Let me check the audio connection here.
yeah, make sure that that audio is on, but yes, Huyen, I can,
That's not what I want.
just a
very good.
moment, Huyen. We are just
No, this
figuring
one's
out
fine.
the system that is connected to the projector.
Okay, sure.
Sound,
Can I share my screen?
HDMI output.
Yes, you can.
That's
Awesome.
good. I don't know why this is not working. We still don't have any sound from Nguyen.
Hello?
Yeah, but it's not going through Ben's computer here. For some reason,
Oh, I see.
the HDMI is not being recognized. Hold on. Can you ask Nguyen to take a pause?
Sure, sure.
What's going on here? Sound, HDMI TV. Put volume 100%. These settings are all fine. Here we go. All right, it was Zoom. Now you can go, Nguyen.
Okay, great. Okay, it's working right now, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. I think I can share my screen right now. Oh, it's actually not right here. So I'm very happy to be here today and then to present my perspectives and my experience, my research on artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence for community media. I'm pretty sure that all of the tools that I introduced today, I discussed today, already been well known by you because you are media professionals. But bear with me. I just want to raise several issues. I mean threats. And then I also want to discuss several tips or solutions that I think it may help minimize the threats that we identify. Okay. To save time, I'm gonna go and first introduce some useful tools. Of course, we have tons of artificial intelligence tools for journalists. I will share my slides like after the presentation. I will share the slide, and if you click on the link here, you'll be able to go to a website where you have like more than 50 artificial intelligence tools for a variety of stages: writing, editing, producing, distributing, publishing, like a lot of tools. Very nice. But for me, I'm using a variety of tools over the past 2 years. But for me, the most useful tools are the 6 tools that I identify here. The first one is Google Translate. You may be laughing because like, is this like, we didn't even think of it as artificial intelligence tool, but actually it's really helpful and useful. And I can give you like one example. I was in South Korea last month, and I went straight to a strike, a protest in South Korea in downtown Seoul. But I don't understand anything because I'm Vietnamese. I know only English. I cannot read Korean. But thanks to Google Translate, I can read all of the signs and the labels, and I know that they are protesting against the government. And then they also commemorate the Itaewon disaster. Kind of like I can understand a lot of things by just like taking pictures and put it into Google Translate, and it translates everything for me. And surprisingly, it's accurate because the next day, Yonhap News published an article, and I was like, oh, I got it correctly, everything. Of course, with a little bit of research on Google. Okay, so I highly recommend Google Translate for anyone who travel and report in a foreign country. It's super helpful. You can do it either way, English to a foreign language or vice versa. Okay, the second one I want to introduce to everyone is Canva Studio. Believe it or not, but this is the reality. Nowadays, my students, my colleagues no longer use Adobe Suites. We actually switch to use Canva Studio. The first reason is it's free. The second reason it is cloud-based, and you don't have to save. It automatically saves for you. And you can actually share that with your friends and your co-workers, your co-designers. You can form a team on that. But the great thing about Canva Studio recently, they added artificial intelligence tools. Okay, so the first thing they did, they integrated text to image. Very similar to Midjourney, very similar to DALL-E, very similar to Stable Diffusions. Oh my God, when I found that, I was like, oh, I don't have to subscribe to Midjourney anymore. I actually paid like $10 per month to use Midjourney for the past 2 years, but now I don't have to anymore. I can use Canva Studio, and it integrates with a lot of templates for me, so I can actually use it. Very easy. I'm happy to share that with everyone who wants to have like a demo on how to use Canva Studio with text to image. The second thing about Canva Studio, they also integrated video generation from your own images and text. That is really cool. If I have time after the presentation, I'll show you a video that I make from my profile pictures, introducing myself and the topics today. And it's so quick. It's just like 5 seconds. I upload my photo and I write the text and I click generate a video. And I have a video of myself and my mouth just like moving, my eyes also moving, exactly like a broadcaster. Very interesting about Canva Studio. That is called DID. That DID feature was integrated into Canva Studio as well. It's very convenient for you to use. Canva Studio also have a translate feature. So basically you can create a design in English and then you can translate it into a variety of languages. But be aware that Canvas Studio doesn't allow you, it's not smart enough to translate the image with the foreign language. No, you have to type it on top of the image. So Canvas Studio can translate it. So it's not like as smart as Google Translate in that aspect. Okay, I'm done with Canvas Studio. Now I'm moving to another tool that I use like over the past 5 years, OpenRefine. OpenRefine is actually free and it's very, very useful for me, especially when I have to process a large set of data of more than a million of records, or more than 30,000 of records, something like that. Then I have to use OpenRefine because I cannot like have time to matching the data. You know that when you have like a big set of data and all of the kind of like values has it's not like matching. For example, I have a data set about salaries for all the state workers in the state of Kansas, and I have that data set including more than 30,000 like records, if I remember it correctly, and then all of the positions kind of like enter manually, I believe. So that's why it doesn't match very perfectly. So when I'm using OpenRefine, just one click, it will identify groups of jobs, groups of position, and ask me, do you want to merge them together or not? And I was like, okay. Of course, there's some like some mistake that the software make, but later I can actually check it easily. So that is how I use OpenRefine to help with my data visualization production. Okay, now let's move on to talk about ChatGPT. And everyone is familiar with ChatGPT, but for me, I'm using ChatGPT to write the Python code. And sometimes also writing the R codes to process data. For example, last semester, I got a data set from NASA. It's a really big data set, like several gigabytes. And I was like, there's no way that I can handle that in Google Sheets. I'm teaching my students how to use Google Sheets, but when I got that data set, I was like, no, I'm not going to be able to teach them process NASA data on Google Sheets. I need to use Python. Python and R. And then I was like, how can I let my student, like, how can I teach my student from the beginning of how to write Python, how to write R codes? There's no way the student want to learn. It's too difficult for them. So I'm thinking of, hey guys, let ChatGPT teach you how to do single step by step. So I break that data set into 5 steps and I write the descriptions that meet text prompts for each step. And I ask my student, hey guys, put the text prompt into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to write you the Python code. If you run into an error, copy the error, put it back to ChatGPT, it will correct it. Can you believe it? 75% of my students was able to process the NASA dataset successfully and get it into a nice Flourish Studio chart. Even like racing bar charts. Oh my God. Oh, I'm sorry, not racing bar chart. They got the maps. The maps are a lot of bubbles because that is NASA fire dataset. Okay, so ChatGPT is super helpful when you need to use programming. And that is the same thing that journalists doing. They write Python code. But if we don't know Python, we don't know R, hey, ChatGPT there as an assistant to help us. Okay, now the next thing, and I promise we'll be very brief. This is Perspective AI. And Perspective AI is a product by Google and it's provided for free. It has been there for a long time. It's not a new artificial intelligence tool. It's very, very old. And the New York Times adopted Perspective AI for a long time. and then they use Perspective AI to moderate comments. Like following the publishing of their news stories, they have a lot of comments. And here's their approach. They have a staff of 20 people, more than 20 people to moderate the contents. But it is like, you can imagine a huge amount of comments for each story. So they need to use AI to help speed up and scale the workflow. Okay, so they using Perspective AI to give every single comment a score. It's called a toxicity score. So if a comment is very toxic, then they're not gonna post the comment. But if the comment is neutral or going down to 0, then they're gonna publish the comment. So this is a really useful tool for all of the news publishers if they want to moderate their content, especially user-generated contents. Highly recommend it. It's so easy to use. I tried it myself, and it's very easy to set up Perspective AI for your website. If you're actually using something similar to WordPress, then you should be fine using Perspective AI. Okay, finally, I found a very useful tools for pricing news stories. Okay, if you are a publisher, you may be familiar with like a hack approach. Like you have a fixed amount of money, and then you ask your subscriber to pay that fixed amount of money to read your news. Okay, but if you are using Piano VX, it will using algorithms to actually study the patterns and the behaviors of the subscribers or your potential subscribers and give them the price that it thinks they want to pay. So by that way, you can like improve like subscribers, increase your subscribers. You're not gonna miss any of subscribers. So Piano VX is super fun. And also my focus in my latest research project. So I have done a research on pricing strategies for community newspapers in the US. And I found that they actually have very interesting pricing strategies, and a few of them actually using dynamic meter paywalls. Okay, that means that it keeps changing. It's not fixed, it keeps changing. And I was like, very interesting, but there are only a few of them using it, not all of them. And I hope that like all of the community media websites will use certain like software like Piano VX or artificial intelligence to establish dynamic paywall. This will be really help improve the revenues for the newspaper. Okay, I'm done with useful tools. Now tips. I'll make it really short. Okay, so my tips, I think that there are 3 things that we need to pay attention when we use AI art. I mean, when we're using artificial intelligence tools. First, we want to make sure that we keep human beings in the loop when it comes to moderating conversation about news. I'm not recommending that we use artificial intelligence alone. No, it's not going to happen. We need to have a staff with human beings who can actually make better informed decisions than the robots. Okay, the second tip I want to offer everyone, if I'm allowed to, is to check the terms of use so that you can be clear about the sources of training data and the data policies before you decide to use an AI tool. Finally, you want to be as transparent as possible about your use of non-human creativity when publishing your AI-powered video works. Finally, a threat. I'm a big fan of technological advances. I don't see threats, I see opportunities. However, I just want to kind of like raise an alarm about the surge of disinformation and propaganda that comes along with the use of artificial intelligence, because the AI makes it very easy to deceive readers. So a lot of people, not journalists, they may not be well trained in journalism. They actually produce a lot of content that actually mislead people, misleading readers. So I consider that as the biggest threat that we need to deal with. Yeah. And the second threat, I think, is potential legal lawsuits from unpaid labor. So when the software, the artificial intelligence company actually train the robots using a set of data, they may not ask the artist, the designer, for the permission to include in their corpus. So that's why I consider unpaid labor and maybe generate potential legal lawsuits in the future. And finally, I'm not sure if it's a threat or not, but for me, currently, if I'm using a lot of AI art generation tools, and I found that their quality actually very poor. Okay, comparing to human designers, actually, the quality of AI arts not really amazing. And finally, I found like we can encounter social biases if we keep using AI, because these tools actually well trained in Western culture, and maybe the minority groups, the data coming from the minority groups are not included in the corpus, or included in a very small proportion. So that's why causing social biases. As Stable Diffusion admitted that in their self-disclosure limitations and biases, they admitted that they actually bias towards just the Western culture. Okay, I think these are the threats that I identify, and for the solution, I think I will let it open for conversation before actually jumping into any conclusions. Finally, thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't go over the time.
You're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Professor Dana Koester. She is the creative director of the college's Media Innovation Center at the West Virginia University Reed College of Media. Her work has focused on technology and community media with special interests in audience building and new economic models for sustaining journalism. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Koester. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Kester.
Kester. Okay. Sorry.
So should I share my screen then for my slides?
You can, or I can share mine. I have yours uploaded. It's your choice.
Yeah,
Whatever
if you
works.
don't mind, I'll let you do it, and then I'll just signal when to go to the next slide, if that's all right.
Okay.
All right, great.
That's
So
not, wait, I got the wrong one. Sorry.
oh,
You
sorry.
have two. Oh, yep, you're right.
If preferred,
should.
I can do it. It's that's fine too, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, it might be a little easier, a little bit more efficient if you do that.
Okay, all right, let me pull it up here real quick. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes. Yep, we're good.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, thank you everybody for having me. And I wanted to point out that I am somebody who is, I consider myself, or have considered myself, a futurist working in sort of anticipating and predicting change in media. But I am also, I work at the Media Innovation Center, but I also am an editor of a very small digital newsroom. So I very much am putting theory into practice. So I kind of wanted to take the range of that for this presentation. So I'm putting on my futurist hat first to kind of address a constellation of risks and opportunities that span short-term and long-term. And I'm going to ask you to engage a little bit with some historical contextual information that might on the surface seem impractical, but I hope by the time I get to the end of the presentation, you'll see it as extremely relevant and practical, because I also think we have a duty of care as journalists, especially in local spaces and regional spaces, to be deeply informed on the nature of AI and what that means, not just for our immediate jobs and practices, but also for society and the public that we serve. And I also think that we have a window of opportunity for a renaissance for local and regional news that we should make the most of. So to start, I'm actually going to take you back to 2005. So this is less than 20 years ago, but honestly, it might as well be 1905. I feel like if we look back at sort of the exponentially changing landscape that we've all just experienced. But this is a quote I used to use back then in 2005. This is literally pulled from slides and presentations I used to do when we were anticipating, this is the beginning at that point of Web 2.0, the social web. But you have to sit with this statement for a moment and really digest the implications of that and where we are at this moment in a accelerating curve. And again, just bear with me here. This is from a Time magazine spread, I believe, when Ray Kurzweil, who is the one who coined the phrase, "the singularity is near." He wrote a book in 2005 called "The Singularity is Near," which spawned a some say cult-like community that rose up around this idea. There was even a singularity.net community. At one point, I was very much a part of that community. But since then, there have emerged a lot of critiques of Kurzweil and sort of the approaches that he was taking, in particular of what was called the transhumanism movement, which is this sort of post-singularity, post-human hybrid intelligence model that we actually do have to pay attention to because there has emerged a lot of critique of the kind of callousness that the sort of long-termerism view and a post-humanism view toward the present injustices and persistent inequalities that we currently have and have not addressed in our global and local communities. But also it's important to realize Kurzweil was hired in 2012 quietly by Google to lead their engineering team. And I think the quote was to work on new projects involving machine learning and language processing. Because I had already long followed Kurzweil at that time, I remember I asked somebody at Google about the hire, and they just sort of nonchalantly said, "Oh, yeah, I think he's working on search algorithms." But also at the time, Google and several other tech companies were quietly buying up robotics and machine learning companies. So it was very apparent to me then, and it certainly is apparent now, that they were working on much more than search algorithms. So what is the singularity? By AI standard, it's when machine learning surpasses human intelligence, and as some warn, our ability to understand or control it. Notably, it borrows from the language of physics. The singularity is the core of a black hole, because it suggests we cannot know what lies beyond it for humanity. So that's pretty heady stuff. But I wanted to point out that Kurzweil predicted in 2005 that we would reach the singularity between 2023 and 2030. So here we are. So I want to talk a little bit about, these are several of the graphs that you often see in relationship to the singularity. I want to talk a little bit about exponential change, going back to that first quote at the beginning of the slide, and why humans are so ill-equipped for it, and how it repeatedly captures industries over and over again off guard. So even knowing from 2005 on what we would be beginning to address right now, we are still in a situation of, I would argue, playing catch up. So exponential change is not linear, obviously. It's a terrible strain on resources, budgets, practices in every field, legislation and policy work, and especially on the individuals trying to navigate change. And I want to emphasize individuals navigating change in a system that has already amplified and accelerated inequities that are baked into the prior systems that have not been fully addressed. That's part of where our duty of care come into it. So there's always a point in exponential change at which the graph becomes vertical. So we're well into the vertical stretch of this curve. So we've already heard a little bit about the potential perils of emergent AI. I'm not going to fully address those risks here, and I'm sure other panelists will also. Everybody's heard that the quote that even AI itself predicts that there's a 10% chance of destruction of humanity. So I don't necessarily have on the doomer. I don't have the doomer perspective. I also don't blindly follow sort of a tech utopian optimism aspect also. But I think it is important for us as informed citizens, and especially as journalists with civic power, to be fully informed and fully aware of this larger landscape that I'm trying to paint here. In order to have any power in emerging tech, we have to participate as early adopters, and ideally, especially now, as early influencers, so that we can shape the practice, ethics, and mitigate the harms of tech. We cannot merely be consumers. So anyway, trying to balance my doomer instincts with the excitement about the possibility, again, of technology to do good things. And honestly, it's some pretty magical things that can be genuinely helpful, especially to our under-sourced newsrooms. So the duty of care, balancing responsibility with opportunity. So again, I want to emphasize that we cannot merely act as consumers in OpenAI, seeking products to lighten our load. I mean, we're going to do that. We have been doing that. We've already been doing that. But I also believe this is an opportunity for local and regional small outlets to reassert and redress power imbalances that the field has suffered over 3 decades. We have many responsibilities, but I like to turn the phrase on its head at this moment. The phrase you've all heard, with power comes great responsibility, and suggest with great responsibility comes power. Generative AI is going to bring with it a kinetic landscape of false and dangerous content. If we assert, and if we narrate our role as experts at data veracity, there's a window of opportunity to establish local news as a trusted source and to rebuild authentic relationships with our communities through many of the tools that are becoming available to us. And we should seek to fully disintermediate social media in that process and now rely more fully. I think a lot of us have already been moving in that space, but we should move even further into space where we are relying on direct relationships with our readers. So we have a motto in our newsroom, do no harm. And we also frequently ask the question in the face of any use of new technology in our, in my research, but also in our newsroom, who benefits and who is harmed. So this is a great place to start interrogating new tools and practices. And again, narrating that process to our readers, building that trust. Again, narrating that process to our readers, not as consumers, but that we are asserting to our communities, we are experts in AI and can help them navigate this shift in what is going to be a major societal shift. And in that way, I think that we can also collectively author new practice for local news that ensures our communities, our field, and our mission is served rather than our merely serving the goals of technology. The other thing that I wanted to offer is to reflect on, either in your own experience or what we know about how our field has been disrupted, like what went wrong the first time, and anticipate that now. But I'm already seeing, so in the prior disruption, journalists tended to focus on technology for content creation and content production. And there are obviously some new tools emerging for that. But the true disruption to our industry was not in how we created content, it was in distribution models. So I think we need to not be distracted by the ease with which we can produce content and let that get in the way about thinking about these new tools and the role it can play in distribution and audience development. So those are some of the experiments that we're going to be doing in our newsroom. And I'm, really excited to talk with anybody, other newsrooms who are doing those kinds of experiments. But in particular, I'm wanting to think about how we can reclaim distribution channels. And I'm going to wrap up here. Oh, I just wanted to offer this. This is a research model. This is actually from a presentation I did. I just pulled it from 2005 because it's time again for us to think about this. But there is a theory of early adoption plus 5 years. I'm going to adapt it to 2 years because we're accelerating. And there's a benefit called first user benefits. And this theory has held up over 30 years. So I am hoping it's going to hold up for another few years. But when you are a first user in your network or your community using technology, you can expect to have these benefits: increased centrality, increased power, increased access to resources, close association with other innovators, higher risk tolerance, less aversion to change, increased opinion leadership, and establishment as a change agent. So these continue to be these continue to be benefits that I recommend that you bring into your space merely by being a early adopter of technology. I just was dropping some other resources here. I think some of it, we're probably going to be referencing some of the same resources. I did want to point out there is a local news outlet in Northern Virginia that's experimenting with this. I think Neiman Lab did a story about them, but you should check out their outlet. And he is helping to generate new newsletter products using AI. I also wanted to say, I had all but given up on Twitter until the last few months. It is actually right now phenomenal for like daily, step-by-step how to do something with ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E 2. And I've bookmarked several of them. I'm using some of them right now. There was a really good one, how to train ChatGPT with the voice of a brand, which for our newsroom, 100 Days in Appalachia, we definitely have kind of an attitude and a voice. So I'm going to experiment with that. And I've bookmarked several threads. I didn't want to list all the folks that I'm following, but if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to share, or you can check out my Twitter and see who I am following. But to me, it's just been, it's been pretty phenomenal. Also, the prior panelists talked about using ChatGPT for writing code, which has just been like a mind-blowing miracle that has changed my life for just doing some of the simplest things. And then also we have asked the person in our newsroom who does social media to also begin to develop their prompt engineering skills, and which is, I think, a natural evolution of what was once a very new job, 10, 15 years ago. And then also don't neglect, whoops, I don't know what I just did. All right, I'm going to stop share because I'm at the end of it anyway. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ketzel. Our next panelist is Professor Plattenberg. Professor Plattenberg teaches multimedia journalism courses in the School of Communication and Journalism at Auburn University. She advises, and she also advises the university's chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. Her research interests primarily fall at the intersection of race and media, And more specifically, she studies the Black press, Black identity, media portrayals, and pop culture. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Plattenberg. Thank you. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us.
No, sure. Thank you for the invitation. Okay, I am going to share my screen if that's okay. Because I have a few slides I'd like to work off of here. Okay, does everyone see a PowerPoint?
Yes. Yeah, we do.
Yes. Okay. All right. So again, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to have this discussion with you all today. I'm coming from this to this presentation not only as a journalism professor, but also a working journalist. I still do freelance journalism. And I also work in my capacity as a journalism educator with smaller community startup publications who are not necessarily formally trained in journalism, but who are still trying to do journalism in what we would typically consider to be a news desert. And so training and education on sort of innovation and technology is something I'm very passionate about. And so I want to break, and I promise I'm going to try to stick within my 15-minute window here. As a matter of fact, I'm going to set my timer so I can make sure I stay on track here. But I want to cover three larger sort of umbrella topics here, some of which has already been talked about. And so I'll just try to scoot along pretty quickly, but I also want to offer some new ideas that we haven't discussed yet. First of all, I want to discuss sort of the evolution of what's got us here. Again, knowing we've already talked a bit about that, but I'm hoping I can add something to that conversation. And then I want to talk about the environment, the current media landscape and environment, and some of the concerns that people may have, both as audience members and as journalism creators. And then I want to offer some of my best practices, or otherwise known as how to make lemonade with lemons. And so, with that being said, I would argue that where we are today was always going to be in the mix somewhat. When we think about AI, we think about ChatGPT, some of the more popular artificial intelligence programs. Arguably, it is just a transformation of some of the things that we've already been working with. Particularly when it comes to news, we think of automation, right? When that technology or that tool came out, we thought it was pretty cool. We were able to get things published in an automated fashion, and that made our work more expedient, made it a bit more streamlined, made it easier to do what it is that we do. From there, we started moving into the lane of virtual reality and augmented reality, which sometimes I know people tend to conflate augmented reality and artificial intelligence, when in actuality, they're two different things, but there are some underlying commonalities there. But nonetheless, augmentation, where we've gone from everything to in terms of putting ourselves in places or augmenting our current reality of where we are at the moment. Or even if you purchase Amazon, if you're an avid Amazon shopper like I am, they constantly visit my house here, being able to do the Amazon augmented virtual try on, right? Like those are things we don't consider, but that are powered by some of the same sort of technologies that led us to where we are here today. Which is this generation. So generating content using computers to generate content that's we may not have created as humans. And so again, that's sort of the evolution, I would argue, of what has got us here today. And so with that being said, I want to share a few statistics because I know that we all have conversations either personally or professionally about what our current news environment looks like. But I also think it helps to see some of these hard and fast statistics and facts that really help paint the picture of what we are currently operating in. So one statistic I want to share is the United States ranks last in media trust. So 29% among 92,000 news consumers surveyed in 46 countries. COVID didn't help things. So while COVID improved trust rankings for other countries in terms of journalism and news produced, here in America, we continue to flatline. And I know we've got an international audience here. And so Of course, these numbers may differ depending on your country, but here in America, we're working in a very polarized environment where trust is already very low when it comes to news content. There's this whole argument about fake news. And so we're already sort of working behind the curve here. We're at a challenge. A few more statistics I'd like to share is 9% of people in the US trust mass media, quote, a great deal, and 31% only a fair amount. 27% have, quote, not very much trust, and 33% have none at all. And so, again, if we are talking about introducing new technologies that some may argue would help us to be able to produce more journalism, we also have to keep in mind sort of the common or some of the more prevailing thoughts on our industry and what we are operating against here. And this information came from a Gallup poll here. So in addition to sort of this general distrust of journalists and the products that we're putting out, we're also working with folks who are harnessing sort of this general dislike or distrust of media to create microsites or opinion blogs masquerading as news sites to put out misinformation or disinformation, which is on intentional wrongful information, or even maybe doing it not so intentionally with misinformation. We live in a world with deep fakes even. So like this whole sort of embracing of AI is very pervasive in our society in general, not just with news, but in many aspects of our lives here. And I give this example. I don't know how many of you know the artist Drake, the rapper. And you're like, why are we talking about Drake in a conversation about AI? But he has been very vocal and very public recently about there's an AI artist who sounds almost just like him who's putting out music. And if you don't know the difference, you would assume that it was coming from that artist. And arguably the same thing could be said about news content. If it's not done correctly or not enough attention is paid attention to whether the facts are accurate or put out correctly, people in the lay folks or mass audiences could potentially be very confused about, is this information coming from a very legitimate news source, or is this coming from someone who has maybe harnessed artificial intelligence technology to put out information with the intention to purposely create discord and chaos and disinformation in our society. And so I think if we're going to have this conversation about how to best use this, or, you know, what are some of the perks of using AI, I think we can't do that conversation justice without paying attention to some of these other facts that talk about where we are today and how people are perceiving, again, news content. So I'm going to move on just very quickly here. One other area of concern that I think that we should be concerned about as news creators is this prevailing or increasing sense of news avoidance from news audiences. And I bring this up to say that I think as news creators that we are looking for ways to keep our audience's attention. As we know that there are a million different things that are happening in our society, and it's really hard, or it's getting increasingly harder to keep readers' attentions and to get them to, or even new people, to maintain who we have, who are engaging with our news products, and to bring in new news audiences, just because we're competing with so many different sources. Some people are not necessarily a fan of the type of content that's being put out. And so we've got people who are increasingly avoiding news for various reasons. And so I know that it may be tempting as news creators to engage with AI as a means of bringing readers back in or recapturing their attention, but I don't necessarily think that that is the end all be all solution here, if you will. But I think it's still important to realize, again, that we do have people who are leaving news, and although we do need to find some way to reel them back in, AI might not be the end all be all solution there. And I just want to share again another graphic here that I think could be very helpful to you, not just in terms of talking about AI, but this whole conversations of news avoidance or fatigue. Some of the ways that journalists are looking to recapture, again, audience attention could be anything from including explanatory journalism stories to Q&A formats, solutions journalism, slow journalism, inspirational stories, etc. And we're going to come back to this chart in a bit here, but I wanted to share this now, again, for the aforementioned reasons, but to also point out the different sorts of story formats that our news creators are finding success with in terms of countering news avoidance and fatigue. And keeping in mind that AI may not be able to produce all of these different types of story content. And so I think that's actually probably a leg up, a win for the humans for now. But I did want to point this out. And so, again, in addition to this polarized news environment that we're currently operating under, news audiences avoiding news altogether, maybe no longer engaging with journalism. We're also operating under an environment of smaller staff sizes, shrinking budgets in newsrooms, and reader and employee attrition. And so all of these come together, all these different ingredients come together for a mix that, again, could leave journalism ripe or open to wanting to use artificial technology or artificial intelligence rather, but then also maybe too eager, that in a way that may leave us vulnerable to some of the pitfalls and some of the downside of embracing this new technology. And so be mindful of that as well. So on that note, I did want to offer a few best practices that I, as an educator, and again, as a news journalist, I offer to my students, and I offer to anyone who wants to have this conversation. We don't have a formal code of ethics when it comes to at least journalism in the United States. We have the Society of Professional Journalists. That is an advocacy organization that does speak to some of the best practices or best ideas of how journalists should operate. But I think it needs to advance to include conversations of how we operate with AI. And so, keep that in mind. I'd be interested to learn, what things are like in your part of the country or your part of the world. Is there a code of ethics? Maybe that's something that could be worked on in a joint collaborative format. Additionally, it's a very weird space, right? Because we, as a journalism educator, we always push our students not to plagiarize. But then we're having conversations of using perhaps ChatGPT. Like, is this a form of plagiarism, right? If we are producing something and then not giving credit to the bot that wrote it. And so I think this is right. This is right for conversations of, ethics. So ethics and plagiarism and how we include this, how we give attribution to what we are using from these AI tools. I do think that humans still have a leg up here because I think that news audiences want that human touch. They connect with certain journalists, right? They tend to connect with a certain writing style. They connect with the certain quotes that may be included in an article or included in a news package for TV. And so I think that as we are today, that AI has not yet caught up to creating that sort of humanized approach to storytelling that I think that our readers and our audiences still value. Now, we may be having a very different conversation next year, but as of now, I think this is where we are. As journalists, I do encourage you to keep using that as a selling point of why readers should not yet give up on news, particularly those who may be not a huge fan of, or those who may subscribe to this idea of fake news and already distrusting news and being even more so leery about it because of AI, the increased usage of AI. I think you still have to push that human element of, yes, although we may be using something from AI, we still bring a lot to the table. I know something that we regularly did in my newsroom working is office hours. So just as a professor, we as journalists would publish times that we would be in the office and have an open door policy to people in the community. to come out, sit with us, have conversations about news that they would like to see, give their opinion of what we were doing. And so it still put that face to the storytelling efforts that were being produced. On that same note, reader or viewer advisory groups also can help. It helps, again, just reaffirm to audiences that there are humans who are here working on the content, and we have not yet fully transitioned to the matrix. And so other things that I would suggest you as journalists really focus on is using proper attribution. So if you are getting any information that you're using from an AI tool or AI platform, make sure that you're very clear on explaining where you got that from and why you maybe made the decision to utilize that. And also fact checking. I know that, many people are big fans of ChatGPT these days. But as we have seen, it's not always accurate, or it's pulling information from Wikipedia, which sometimes is accurate, but it's pulling information from a variety of sources. And so again, if we're thinking about the value that we as humans still bring, I think that is one that I would use as a selling point if I'm going to use that sort of content. Taking heed of audience requested content. And I'm going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. But I think going back to that slide that I shared a few minutes ago about some of the different options one may try to reel back in news audiences, just keep in mind that AI may not yet be able to produce some of those things, some of those different storytelling formats. And so therefore, I think that's a selling point for you. And I don't mean to give this presentation as an us versus the machines sort of conversation, because I think that there's room for us to do both. But what I do think that is that humans still bring an element that AI has not yet caught up to, and maybe ideally will not catch up to. And so we have to create a good mix of the two. Transparency and news in the news gathering process, just as though I know as journalists, we are at a big push for being transparent, of letting people know how the sausage is made, right? So telling people why we decided to interview this source, or why we decided to include this data in the story. I think we have to take that same approach when it comes to explaining, again, why we may have chose to use some sort of AI format, even if it's to just write a quick blurb, because I think people deserve to know that. And as I often tell my students, I think half the battle with any new technology is just knowing where to go to get the information. And so I know that some of the previous presenters have shared some really great sources. I did want to share a few more sources that may be helpful to you if you're looking for AI technology or platforms to utilize for news creation. And so the Journalist Toolbox, the Poynter Institute, the Knight Center, Trusting News, all of these would be some good sources that I would advise to you to check out going forward. And then lastly, I think media literacy is still going to be key here. Again, I am not fully anti-AI tools for journalism. That's not the position I'm coming from, but I am coming from a position of we do have to be very mindful of keeping audiences in the mix and the know-how of why we're doing what we're doing, and maybe what has been created by the machines versus the humans. And so I think media literacy, or continuing to teach media literacy to audiences, is going to be very important on that front. And then I'll wrap up here very quickly. I think as journalists, this is a slogan or motto that I was taught early on in my journalism career, and I still try to keep this in mind. But as journalists, it's our duty to advocate, to educate, and to innovate. And so AI certainly falls under, I'd say, all of these three categories of sort of our umbrella mission, if you will. And I think as long as we keep this top of mind, then I think we'll continue to be on the right track here. And with that being said, I'll share this, and I promise I'll wrap up here. Talking about story content, I think we also want to be very creative in terms of using some of the AI tools to come up with some interesting stories. So this is one that caught my eye the other day from the Houston Chronicle, which is the major newspaper in Houston, Texas. They used ChatGPT to get a sort of sense or synopsis of what Houston was going to be, what Houston would look like in the coming years. And so as you can see from a couple of these, obviously Houston doesn't look like this today, but it turned what it gathered from ChatGPT and turned it into a viable news story. So I know it looks pretty frightening. It looks very, like something that you would not expect to see. But I thought this was a very creative use of AI tools to produce a news story, and still had a human touch because they still gave their input and still did some reporting on the topic, but it was a collaborative effort, if you will. And so with that being said, if you have any questions or concerns, here's my last, I'll just scoot here. If you need to reach out, here's my contact information, and I hope I didn't breeze through this too quickly. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Professor Plattman. So are we good hearing from our final panelists and then taking a break? Or yeah, good. Okay. All right, so our next panelist is Professor Mari. He focuses on media history and media law at the Manship School of Mass Communication at Louisiana State University. He studies media history, media law, and especially digital transitions and their impact on news workers. Most of his research is focused on the history of the computer in the American newsroom, the social, cultural history of the American newsroom, and a history of disruptive technologies from 1900 to 2010. And most of those were book titles that I grabbed. So with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Mari. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Bill, for including me. And great stuff from the other panelists. I've learned a lot so far this afternoon. I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'll get started here. And so, as Ben said, can you guys see my screen okay?
Kind of, sort of. It says you are. There you go. Yep.
Slow. Yeah.
It's good. It's good now.
Okay, cool. As Ben pointed out, I do study the history of technology in the newsroom, and so that means basically, technology tools. And so I want to talk to you guys today about a few big picture points regarding the context for AI and what I like to call automation, to borrow from some other scholars in the newsroom and journalism. Maybe give us some context looking back to the early 20th century through to today. And I'll talk about a couple of my books in this presentation. I'm happy to share copies, PDFs with you all if you want to reach out to me by email. So please don't hesitate to do that if you find any of these things interesting. All right, so let's get started with my first 2 points. So the anxiety around automation is pretty old in journalism. It goes back to at least the 1920s, and an editor and publisher, which, as you might know from your own work with American Journalist, is our big trade publication. You see articles in there about reporters becoming robots and doing their jobs without any human intervention. And it's not even really half joking, it's kind of serious. And so you have a lot of worry, even as long ago as a century ago, regarding the doing away with the human part of journalism. At a time when journalism was pretty industrial, pretty factory oriented, that was a very, very real anxiety. In the mid-century, you have concern about the rise of television and what it's doing to news, and a lot of doomsday articles about the end of at least print journalism as they knew it at the time. And I want to say that some of these fears were not necessarily unfounded. I'll show you some cartoons as I talk from the trade press, from editor and publisher, regarding technologies like the internet or the computer. And they did, in fact, do some damage to journalism, which is good to acknowledge and good to face, I think, if we're going to be thinking about journalism's future and its future with technologies like AI. It has taken some jobs from people. So probably the classic case study is the move to teletype machines, which some of my older people in the audience might remember from their newsroom experience back in the 1970s and before. These have replaced people, telegraphers, who had taken the news down by hand from the telegraph. Thousands of people lost their jobs. And also later on, with the advent of computerization and the elimination of copy readers, not copy editors, mind you, but the folks who made sure everything was going across the page for H&J, hyphenation justification, you also had another wave of job losses and a lot of anxiety about the future of news work, especially on the production side of journalism. But there have been new jobs made with technology, like graphic design and mobile journalism. So it's a kind of a both and thing. In general, though, a lot of worry over time. So that's not a new thing at all. In fact, I would say that that's kind of reassuring to me as an historian, is that old concerns are actually old and not new. And so it's good to learn from what happened before to see what might happen next. Here's some more cartoons of people worried about technology replacing their jobs back in the 1980s. And you think this is a new worry, but there were many editorials and many news stories about AI, especially in the 1980s, with the early advent of software that could write basic news stories or other types of things like weather reports. Software has been able to do this for about 40 years. And we're only just now doing it for real in our newsrooms, but the ability to do it has been around for some time. Two factors have helped to have helped to encourage the survival of news organizations in the middle of big changes. I'm borrowing from a couple scholars here, Angel Ariz from Spain and Heinrich Onnerbring from Sweden. Both of these are good scholars to look at if you're curious about kind of the intellectual work behind what do you do with change. The first point is that if you can give your news workers any kind of training, even just a workshop, even just this we're doing right now, you have a huge win in your right direction, so to speak. Doing any kind of work before you have to do the work you need to do really helps your workers do their jobs. It seems kind of dumb, but if you give your folks some training, that's a good step in the right direction instead of throwing them out there and saying good luck. All right. Even Adobe Tutorial, even a Google, they have a lot of really good free tool training manuals online. Even anything like that can help them feel more confident and comfortable with their technologies they're using, especially with AI technologies. And number two, having them have room to fail. All right. So the news organizations that are most successful with the internet today, historically, are papers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. These are big brands. They probably would be okay anyway. But back in the 1990s, all three news organizations took big risk, along with the BBC News, and the Guardian in the UK, took big risk with trying all kinds of things and then not cutting out or eliminating initiatives when they didn't produce income right away. So they took some risk. And in the end, with things like adjusted paywalls and reader input and podcasts, they didn't call them that back in the day, but that's where they were on the Guardian site and the BBC News site. They really were able to take advantage of this early adopter phenomenon that we've already heard about so far this afternoon. So bottom line is that the history of automation and AI in the newsroom shows that it's not an apocalyptic force, nor is it a panacea, a universal solution. It's not a force outside of ourselves. It's part of what we as humans do with our own tools and our own choices. It's very messy and dependent on what we decide to do now in the moment that we're living in, and we're not just reacting to it. So I hope that's a little bit empowering from history. I have more examples I can talk about in the Q&A, a lot more, but I want to keep it short. I kind of shortened this a little bit, knowing that I'm at the tail end of the block here. But I hope that gives you guys some confidence that this is not a new phenomenon. We've been worrying about this for a very, very long time, since again, 1920s and 30s, right through 1960s and 70s, right through the present moment. And we have survived thus far, in journalism. It may not look the same, but it's still around, even though its death has been predicted many, many times. I have 2 books on this, happy to share them with you. I'll see if I can drop them in the chat actually for when we come back after the break. But if you want to email me, I'll send you a copy for free of either one of these books or both. I'm also on Twitter at Will the Word Guy, and also Mastodon if you're on that site at all, the same handle. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you. Yes.
I have the PDFs and I'll just share the PDFs.
Okay, Bill has the PDFs and he'll share the PDFs that you sent. All right, thank you. So it's 3:11. So we'll take a 15-minute break. So that means we'll come back at. So we'll come back. So we'll come back at 3:26. So for a Q&A session. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so some of them I went underneath some of them.
This is how people write accurate stories.
What's the puppy's name?
Oh, it's Rue, like the food.
Ira.
So
Maybe they'll heard him.
Oh, my God.
They asked me.
Wow. Wow.
And they just with another
But this
university.
days I have.
All of those questions.
Don't answer that. I'll do this as well.
They-
You both want
Go to the-
one.
yeah,
One
go
to
to
eat.
the-
Everyone. Otherwise, it's gonna be a book. And, young woman and sister. I can't use money because just I'm busy by day. I mean. Peter.
Is everybody back? Anybody missing? Okay. Is everybody back? Do you know? Yes. All right, so we ready to get started?
Yeah.
Can everyone hear us online okay? All right, so we're gonna start the Q&A session. Why is it doing that?
All right.
I don't know, but I just muted this thing and it did okay.
All right, who has questions?
I have a question. I was just hoping not to be the first one to ask.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question is directed to Professor, I hope I'm pronouncing right, Krusta? Kester, pardon me. I like what you said about reclaiming the distribution platforms, and I was wondering if you could please elaborate on what that could look like, because we are currently in a place where literally, I don't know, we are dependent on one man, Mark Zuckerberg. And I remember last year in South Africa, WhatsApp, we had a WhatsApp blackout for probably 4 hours. We were really stuck. Thankfully, Facebook was operational, but it reminded us of, what could happen if, I don't know, Meta were to just switch off all their channels, because we are so heavily dependent on them when it comes to building audiences, distributing, and of course, Google as well is another one. It's basically those two companies. So that's why I really like what you said about reclaiming that space.
Echoing. Sorry. I'm so glad that you asked that question. I don't actually have a full answer of like what to do, other than to say that that's something that we're exploring in our newsroom. We've already been moving away from using social media at all. It hasn't really been a very good conversion for us. It is not something that has helped us monetize or generate subscriptions. And we have real critiques, obviously, of the platforms. So we had already switched over into working with newsletters and email relationship. I'm really interested in thinking about doing more sort of chat-based and text-based relationships with our readers. I am interested in an experiment in working in and Signal, which is another, especially when we're talking about trying to build trust-based relationships with our readers. And that is a secure messaging platform. So that's something that we're looking at considering. Anything that we can do that is a more direct relationship to the reader, and that does not rely on social. Now, I know that is going to be harder for newsrooms that have like sort of evolved their newsroom, and a lot of their digital practices were completely dependent on, or I would say where you feel like it's dependent on the platforms. But if you're interested, there's somebody that I would love for you to talk to. And he literally goes around the country in the US and works with newsrooms and convinces them to get off of Facebook, and then shows them how they can make money and build an audience. And he's very, very good at it. And he was the one who helped us make that transition. We didn't have so much at stake where we felt like there was this huge audience in there. But it was still, I think we've all been a little bit brainwashed into feeling like we have to be there. And so it's just about sort of taking that leap, disintermediating any social platforms. And because I think one of the things is we're sort of tempted to move into those spaces very quickly. Like a lot of stuff has been popping up post Twitter. And I think we have kind of an instinct. It's like, oh, I have to show up there. But I really have been rethinking that. And where I'm showing up is more in direct relationship with our communities, gathering those emails, gathering those physical addresses in some context, and also getting those phone numbers so that we can have a direct messaging-based, text-based relationship with our readers.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I have been publishing for 31 years now as an independent small publisher with a few publications. We've recently started embracing the digital in terms of our news offerings. So for me, this is all very terrifying because I come from traditional print, and obviously now we're going into the digital, but where do you even start? Because it is really scary. I don't know, what advice would you give for me to be able to start with AI? How do you get to that point? Obviously, and also to monetize that. Thank you.
So who would like to field that one? That question. Who was there? Anyone in particular?
I'll say something, I suppose.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I would say that I think that with any new technology, I think it can be easily to get overwhelmed at first as someone who teaches students. And although you may think that they are very tech inclined, sometimes engaging with new technologies can be very scary to them. And so I completely understand. But the same thing that I tell them, I would share with you is that I think that there are plenty of sites out there that make very easy to list, these are some of the different platforms that you can use based on what it is that you want to do. If you want to do a podcast, it would, very easily say, here's a way that you can use AI to do podcasts. If you want to do something else, like write short blurbs, it will very easily spit out some sites that could be good for you. And so I think taking away sort of this idea that AI is something overwhelming and perhaps you need to know how to code and do all of this stuff, we're beyond that at this point. And so I think as long as you have access to Google or access to some of the sites and the different organizations I think we've talked about today, I think that's your best first place. What is it that you want to do? And Google an AI platform that can perform that service for you.
Can I? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You first.
I was just gonna say, they're like literally how I started was my first interface with ChatGPT was my teenager, where I asked him to do some work for me, and he just got in there and started up. And then I asked our socials, the person who runs our socials, I was like, look, I need you to start learning how to use some of these tools. Could you, and just made it part of her job. And I actually think the lift, it does feel overwhelming, but to me, this feels way less overwhelming than because the tools they're so much easier to use. So definitely don't be afraid.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but I remember that you asked about monetize something, but no, what do you mean by monetizing? Like, what is your idea? You want to monetize the content?
Okay, so I obviously want to offer valued content, right? But then what I'm saying is, for example, even our website is something new in my office. And so we haven't monetized that, so we're working towards that. So how do I use AI? Where do I start in terms of news offering, and to be able to monetize using the tools, the AI tools, and I'm able to monetize that process? Because this trip is all about sustainability.
Yeah, so you mean more about distribution models?
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I am not sure, like I'm the best person to answer the question, but I will try my best. So I actually studied several platforms that are offering the distribution models, but it comes with a fee. But they also said that they will negotiate with you based on your budget. So because like they use dynamic meter, so they were willing to sell you the service at any price that you can afford. So I highly recommend that you contact them. For example, I just contact United Robots. Like, it is like a company who helped write articles for local communities in Sweden. Right, they write story about real estate sales and about sports games, about everything. And I asked them, hey, how much could it cost if I want to use that service in my newsroom? Like we have a college campus newspaper. So I asked them how much could they charge us, and it was like $800 minimum. I was like, no way, that's too expensive. Hey, they said, okay, we deal with you. You tell us how much you want to pay. I haven't responded to them yet. I was like, so I think that they want to sell the service, because if they don't sell it right now, in the future, one of the team members in your newsroom will figure it out. So, or other competitors will join, and then they will not be able to sell you at a high price anymore. So go ahead and contact them, and then get the nice price that you can afford. And also I have another thing. I have some friends in Vietnam here. They already started monetizing artificial intelligence. You know what? They actually use AI to write comic books for children, and they sell it to make money. Oh my God. And actually, I just found out a lot of people did the same thing on Amazon Publishing. They did the same thing. They sell money. They sell that kind of things for money. But here's one thing. You want to make sure you check on the copyright laws in your country to make sure they actually allow for non-human authors to be copyrighted. As I know that in the US, they don't copyright non-human authors. So, okay, that's my answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make one more suggestion too? I think that it is important that we utilize our human partners for areas that we may not be so well versed in. Being in academia, collaboration is a big concept they push. And so I think that if, there's no one in your newsroom that is well versed in utilizing AI or monetization, perhaps look to your local universities or your local schools and students who are students who are looking to get into that who may be doing some wonderful things that may not just be fully on everyone's radar. But while you're looking for a need to be filled, they may be looking for experience, and each one can help one together. And so I would recommend that as well.
Thank you. You have another question?
Hi. So my question, so my name is Kate Skinner, and my question is just around ethics codes, because it was an interesting question. One of the speakers was saying, do we have ethics, codes in South Africa? We do. We have a really important ethics journalism code, which the Press Council has. But it would be really interesting to know, are these ethics codes being developed overseas, in other countries, and if they are, where can we find them? Because one of the good things would be to actually take that to our Press Council and get the Press Council to start engage with it. I'm sure they are starting to engage with that, but those kind of lessons from from elsewhere, I think would be very useful. Thanks.
Sure. Pardon me? Anyone want to field that question? What was your question again? I'm sorry.
The question is the ethics code. So ethics codes which deal with AI.
Okay.
Do we have international examples of these ethics codes, and where could we find them?
Okay. Who would like to field that question regarding ethics codes for artificial intelligence? Professor Kester, I see your hand up.
Yeah, the Center for Humane Technology is actually digging into this. They did the documentary film, The Social Dilemma, which some of you may know. And they're entering this space aggressively. And I like I have some disagreements with some things they've done in the past, but I like the position they're taking on AI. And so there's some resources. They actually did a really good presentation on the position that they're taking, that I'm happy. I don't know if you're going to share links or resources back with folks after all of this is over, but I can put together some of the ones that I've been referencing. So I would keep an eye on them. I think, and I know that like all of our different orgs and journalism and across the country are starting to toy with this. I think this is a really excellent opportunity for local and regional news outlets to be very assertive about what the unique needs are at the local level, so that these conversations and ethical models and practice models aren't dominated by like elite major orgs, but that's always the position that I tend to take. So I'm also really interested in folks who want to collaborate in that space, so that we make sure that local has power in building those going forward.
Thank you. I think she has a follow-up.
So that is the most amazing news, because I think that we would definitely, as the AIP, and I mean, that's what we focus on is community media, we would love to collaborate on ethics codes. And we actually have got two of our Press Council reps in the room, Dunasani and Mahmoud, who sit on the Press Council in South Africa on our behalf. And I'm just thinking that, developing that ethics code with our reps would be fantastic, and to have your expertise would be amazing, but also as a starting point to get some of those links so that we can actually start to look at those links. But that kind of a collaboration, I think, I mean, I don't want to talk on your behalf, Mahmoud or Duni, but I'm just thinking that that really would be very powerful. Thanks.
There is a AI subcommittee on the Press Council, and they've had extensive discussions on the developments that have taken place since AI was introduced to journalism soon after December of last year. And that subcommittee has had discussions with some of the organizations in America. And I think the Center for for humane technology is one of them. So a lot of the ideas and concerns and some of the research and studies has already been shared on the subcommittee. And whenever the Press Council has its board meetings, these are shared with the general membership as well.
Were there any comments before we move on to the next question from our
Yes,
panelists?
I have
Okay.
one. Okay.
There's your
So
hand.
it's sorry. Thank you for the question. Actually, at Kansas State University, in the campus newsroom, the students actually care for the ethics of code, and the editor-in-chief, one of my students, he actually wrote a very short, like brief version of the code of ethics that I was like amazed. We actually shared that like at the NICA conference in March in Tennessee. I would love to share that again with everyone here. I think it's just a wonderful effort from a student. He's just like a sophomore at that time. Actually, I think he's really cool. Okay, actually, I'm gonna share that right now. Just a minute. Right here. So towards a new handbook, AI assistant. So we actually have a handbook in the newsroom, and he added like a section on code of ethics, AI assistant. And here's what he wrote. AI refers to any artificial intelligence. He defined that, and then he mentioned photo editing, and then illustration and writing. He said like avoid AI tools such as Photoshop, content aware field if you have heavily. Of course, that's still something that we can like add in or like remove or discuss. But I think he's actually fairly working on photo editing, illustration, and writing. Okay. Yeah, so that is just I want to share like my student work on code of ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. You had a couple questions behind you. Yeah, he had one.
Hi, panel. Thank you so much for the presentations and taking some time to share these tools and also share your outlook of how AI is influencing the future. So I think just from a spirit of sharing, I know that you guys are giving us information. So I think I'm also obliged to actually share information with you as well from my experience that I had at Richland Source, which is part of Source Media Group down in Mansfield, headed up by a CEO called Jay Allred. He has an amazing tool right now that is deploying nationwide. That tool actually aims to free up journalists' time by not letting them do mundane kind of reporting, such as school sports reporting. So what they're utilizing another tech company that uses the audiences or the sports fans' results. Obviously, it is accurate because a couple of them would go insert the sports results in their commentary. And then what he does then is he has pre-written different scenarios of how games would end or how games would actually be won, whether it is coming from the back or winning with a landslide. I don't know what the term is. However, his tool then takes that data from the fans and the results of the game, and then it gets plugged into kind of pre-written scenarios, and that is then fed into the newsrooms for them to use as the sports reporting, because after all, a fact is a fact. If it's a win, it's a win. If it's a draw, it's a draw. And pretty much that frees the newsroom now to deep dive into some deeper investigative content or solution journalism projects, etc., etc. So I just like to share that with my colleagues here and also with you, just a case study of how he has taken AI and used it to free up time for his newsroom to focus on journalism. Equally so, he is then also kind of wiring out that service to other publishers who then can free up their time for their newsroom to do real deep dive journalism. So I thought I'd just share that with you. Thanks.
Can you repeat the name of that newspaper or that publication? I'd like to look that up.
Fantastic. So they are called Source Media Group. They are publishers of Richland Source, Knox Source, and Ashfield Source. They are based out in Mansfield.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have any other questions for our Q&A? Okay, yeah. Yes, there's a hand up over there, but there's a hand up there.
Everybody present to actually look at the website of the Center for Humane Technology. There's some great dialogue on AI, the ethical implications, and also some of the practical uses of AI for media. And that conversation is actually very well worth having in South Africa too, which is where I think the Press Council, as Kate has indicated, comes in. So perhaps for our information, the first port of call would be the Center for Humane Technology, and then having a local discussion on it.
Thank you. Question in the back.
So it's actually less a question, but it's more to say that, what I think would be really important for AIP to do is to literally create a section of our website where we put all of these AI tools, resources. I mean, I love this idea of the student kind of coming up with this ethics code with AI, and gathering all the publications and also the recordings of everything that we've done this afternoon, because I do think that this is going to be one of the most exciting sessions that we've done, and I think there's going to be a lot of interest, not only for AIP members, but actually for a lot of the mainstream media too. So I just want to really thank everybody here, and just to say to all the speakers, please send us as many links and resources as possible, because I really think that there'll be some huge benefits for everybody in the room, but also for all our members back home. And we've got 200 odd members back home of little publishers, and for them to have access to these resources, I think will be very powerful. So thank you very much.
If you guys were to send those links to me, because you have my email address.
Peter at ohio.edu, and then I'll make sure it all gets forwarded.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Before the panelists go? Okay, so you just.
Oh, God, no. No, you're good.
I'm like so.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I thought I'd just take this opportunity really to network, because we are working on a project which I also have kind of brainstormed with Mr. Allred, and I'm just throwing it out here with the hope that perhaps one of you might be able to best guide, or rather perhaps connect me to as well, whether it's developers this side or some like-minded people. So the concept that we are developing at the moment is to simplify complex articles, complex terms. The platform is called In Layman's Term, and the aim of In Layman's Term is to pretty much allow readers, whatever level of reading and literacy, to be able to press a little simplify button on an article, and then it would then reduce the complexity of that particular article. So that is pretty much the idea that we are playing on. However, we have not really started building the platform yet, but we need some advocacy from people like yourselves to kind of say, look, we support this idea. It will close the gap between the people that can read complex concepts and understand them, and to those that are not understanding at all. So yes, we can be in a stage where we are always just creating this content, but assuming that everyone will resonate or everyone will be informed by it. So we're pretty much saying we want to to we want to just remove the whole discombobulation of complex terms and ideas, global warming, xenophobia, etc., by using AI tools. So yeah, I'll put it out there. Whoever is interested in kind of helping me out with this whole concept, please do reach out. And we see it as pretty much saying that it will be a tool one day, as if it's a Chrome plugin, like a read out loud. There should be one day a simplify of an article. Thank you so much. All right.
So we had a question in the chat for Professor Plattenberg. What practical things can you do to make sure Chat GPT doesn't defame someone by accident?
Sure. Well, I was just in the midst of typing an answer, but vocal is better. Say that, I mean, first of all, it sounds probably, common sense, but fact checking. I think that is something that we have kind of gotten away from, unfortunately, as writers and non and even classically trained journalists, but making sure that you're fact checking the information and just not relying upon it. I think a big part of helping to point out whether something might be askew is also making sure that you are doing enough pre-reporting to recognize if something doesn't look right. And I think that comes with doing the work beforehand to making sure that you're, well abreast of all that you need to know for the beat that you may be reporting on, being aware of community members, doing background research on previous reporting, so you can help recognize if something maybe that ChatGPT put together is obviously incorrect. I would say, I think this is a big ask in the environment that we are currently operating in, where we're working with fewer people and we don't have folks, copy editors, someone whose sole job is to copy edit anymore and to catch those facts before it hits the newspaper, before it hits the TV station. But I think that we have to make that effort to incorporate those skills and those processes now, especially since we're incorporating this new information. So more eyes on content and doing more pre-reporting and pre-education, I would say, before you actually get to the reporting, to be able to recognize potential mistakes and defamatory information. And then also, I'm going to go back to something I said before of it doesn't excuse us if a mistake does hit publication, but also being very transparent about reporting processes for each and every story, so that if something does come up that is amiss, there might be a note written at the bottom of the story that says ChatGPT contributed to the reporting of the story or something like that, so we can pinpoint where things may have gone wrong. But that's actually a really good question. I want to pose that to my students.
Thank you. Wait, did you have your hand up? I had a question right here.
Hi, this is just a basic question. I just want to find out what sort of equipment is required to download these AI tools, seeing that some of us use basic PC or maybe a Mac with not enough space to accommodate such programs. Is it a space guzzler, or can one be able to just download it anyhow? Thank you.
So, I'd like to field that one.
Yeah, I think I can try first. So luckily that we don't have to download and install anything, because most of the AI tools actually work on the clouds. So you just need to using a very basic computers with the internet connection, and then you can actually type in the URL for that website, and then you can start using artificial intelligence. Like ChatGPT, you can do OpenAI. Sorry, I forgot the link, but I have it in my presentation. It's very short link. I can actually try it again here. Chat.openai.com. I can copy that and I put it into the chat again. And then for Canva Studio, you can just type in Canva Studio, and then they will pop up in both your desktop and your mobile phone. and extremely easy to work on your mobile phone. You can just upload one of the images that your photographer have. It will automatically select the templates for you. And then you just need to write the headline, and it will automatically put it into the nice graphics for you. And then it giving you a lot of style for fonts and font size and everything. You just click on it and it will work for you. Very quick and easy. In the past, I have to use Photoshop, Illustrator, and a combination. Now, I just need like less than 3 minutes, and I'm done with a graphic for the South Korean protest that I mentioned in my presentation. Yeah, so basic computer is okay. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from our panelists on hardware? Any other questions, comments?
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Wrapping things up. All right, so we're going to wrap up. I just wanted to thank you all for coming again. Thank you for attending and for the great questions. And as Bill said, we'll be making those materials accessible that were requested or during the session. So thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists, and you did a great job. Appreciate it all.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thanks,
Thank-
Doc.